So, what is my field about? I belong to two fields. I'm in global development studies, which is a multidisciplinary, cross disciplinary field of study where we are thinking about inequalities and underdevelopment of people across the world. And it takes a lot of different disciplines and areas of study to really understand some really complex structural issues on the ground. And I also sit in the field of political science, which is a pretty much a more rigid kind of discipline. And I'm trained in one of its areas, which is comparative politics. So as a political scientist, I'm kind of trying to disrupt that space so that we start thinking about things interdisciplinary through an interdisciplinary lens. And so what I do there, and what we generally do as political scientists, we're interested in understanding the dynamics of power and politics and how it impacts people in society and business. And so my take on both of these disciplines is actually to really start to think through underdevelopment and how that affects people of African descent who tend to be actually overlooked when we're examining issues of power and politics, particularly in the economy. Yeah, so I think it was when I was at grad school at Cornell that I became interested in the study of political science. And that's because so much of my curriculum was focused on this sort of trickle down, really pro growth forms of economics and its theory that really was very exclusionary to hearing about what women were experiencing, what people of color, particularly people of African descent, were experiencing when we think about how we allocate goods and services to people who are routinely and historically been denied. And so that's my interest started to arise in that sort of formal study of institutions and started to ask questions about, well, where are those informal institutions that can't interact with more formal actors in our economy and in our society. And so that's when I started to move into the sector of what we call the human economy, thinking through ideas of cooperation and solidarity. What is the solidarity economy? And it can be a pretty complex term. In Canada, we're using this concept of social economy or économie sociale. Other places, they may say third sector. And these terms are, I think that we should be moving away from these terms to capture this concept of solidarity economy. And the meaning behind that is really looking at institutions that are primarily arising out of crisis. They are institutions that are formulated based on a protest. Perhaps some sort of exclusion is occurring in society. And what I like to note is that solidarity economy, that actual concept, comes out of the global south. And so that's really important in that what it does is actually take back this idea of alternatives, the ways in which we think through alternative economies, and puts it right back into other worlds. So the global south in places like Africa, Asia, Latin America, the Caribbean, the Middle East, places that are often denied their place when we think about business and society. And so solidarity economies, if I could say it in a nutshell, that would sort of be this all-encompassing field of study, that it's one that is looking at institutions that are people-driven. They are institutions that are cooperative and collective, and they're ones that are responding against this very extreme variant of capital and capitalist institutions, and trying to put forth a different kind of model, one that is more diverse in the ways we think about financial economies. my research focus is probably troubling even those that are progressive within the solidarity economy, because so much of research and knowledge making tends to prioritize those institutions that are formal. My research right now is really devoted to looking at institutions that are informal. And when I say informal, I mean informal cooperative institutions, primarily led by marginalized women, those of African descent, that are creating um, cooperative, collective institutions, and that are really rethinking the ways in which we do financial economies in our world. And so, right now, I have a couple of projects on the go. I'm looking at moving beyond racial capitalism and thinking of cooperatives within the African diaspora. Um, I'm also looking at, with colleagues, we're looking at community economies in the global south, which actually means that we're starting to take back these concepts of business and putting it right back into different locales across the world. Yeah, so the collective is sort of now in it. I think it's in its final iteration. It started off as a hub, and then it moved into a lab, and that was back in 2014. Today, um, to answer your question more specifically, the Dice Collective is an institution that is informal by nature. It's a collective of, I like to say, hardcore feminists that are looking to prioritize and amplify the research, empirical led research, that cares about what's happening to women and particularly people of African descent in the economy. And so you will find scholars thinking about political economy in a number of subsectors, anywhere from education to health to political systems to finance to girls' education, human rights, and what have you. And what we're all doing as a collective is coming together and supporting each other's work, because there's so many gatekeepers in the academy that make it very difficult for us to have a place to publish, even to meet at conferences. We're making sure that we're sort of we're not waiting to be invited. We're actually now creating our own knowledges as a group and making sure that we are a presence when we attend these events. The Post Growth Institute is a space that invites mostly activists and practitioners who take a risk every day trying to disrupt mainstream conventional business systems. Because what they're actually doing is saying no to this growth thesis that we've all been consumed by. So you have scholars that are thinking about cooperatives in Indonesia, or people collectives across the U.S. And that's the thing. It's sort of rethinking business that is very people driven. And in some locales, that is really dangerous, actually. And so, what the Post Growth Institute does is allow a space for both scholars and activists to come and to share work and to find ways to collaborate. And so that's been really important for me as a scholar, to try to widen my network and actually to listen and to learn from people who are actually taking the risk every day in the field. Yeah, so the fellowship is useful to me in that I'm able to share research that I'm doing that often gets stuck in the academy. And so there's a film, for instance, a documentary that grew out of community called The Banker Ladies. It's open access, it's on Films for Action, and it's really trying to change mindset and to recognize these informal co-ops that Black women in Canada are doing. And it's a great opportunity for me to share that with a global network of fellows who are actually in the field trying to think through how do we transform public policy so that's inclusive of these kinds of real pioneering efforts of making banking more humane. And so that's one way. Another way is that it gives me some shelter when I am standing up and critiquing these corporatized buzzwords called social enterprise, or I don't know, what's the other one? Social innovation. These are all kind of code words to kind of copycat what commercial systems do without transforming the inequalities that exist in our society. So, what I can do through post growth is imagine what social enterprises actually look like when we take on an anti racist, feminist scholarship to really think through what social enterprises look like. So I'm able to share work through that so that in some ways we can co-opt the language that gets lots of investments to make sure that they're embedded in community, that they're subscribing to cooperative and collective values, that actually people who've been left out can actually be sort of the protagonists of how we create those economies. With the social enterprise and the banker ladies, the Growth Institute is actually we do an offering of research that is open access, and they disseminate that research that has already been published, that is often hidden behind paywalls. But I make those research outputs open access, and then we're able to share and disseminate. There have been shorter kind of write-ups because what we're interested in is accessibility. How do you make larger pieces of scholarship more accessible and read across a number of locations? And so that's what we've been offering in terms of sort of sharing our diverse kinds of research or activism that people are doing. Top piece of advice. So I have to say that I love all my students, but I especially have a soft spot for those that are first generation, first in their family to ever go to any kind of post-secondary institution, because I'm one of those people. My parents were Caribbean immigrants, first to New York City and then later to Toronto. And I understand what it means to navigate on your own at a very tender age, even just from applying, then to entering a university, how lonely and daunting that process is. So I definitely have a soft spot for those who are first in their family to attend any kind of university. And sort of the feeling of being alienated, too, because they have really within their circle very few people that they can go to speak about that experience. So the top advice that I give my students is to expand your own social network. And what that means is that figure out where the social capital is, where you are now located, and go to those professors. Go to a few professors and ask them to mentor you. And while you're doing that, I tell them to enjoy everything that you can in terms of extracurricular, particularly at the undergrad level, because that will bode you well in terms of making the friendships, lifelong friendships, as you then move into whether you want to go to grad school or whether you want to pursue higher education, like graduate degrees. You will have a network of friends, but also mentors. So really, I tell them, number one advice, make that social capital work for you as an undergrad. A real pleasure to be a part of the BRN. I'm really proud and so glad that there's a network like this. Thank you.